One year after the incident that changed countless lives, Sarah stood on stage at the first graduation ceremony of the Mitchell Leadership Academy. The auditorium was packed with proud families, industry leaders, and media representatives. Among the graduating class was Cooper's daughter Lisa, who had quit her job to join the Academy's first batch of students. She was now preparing to start her own diversity consulting firm. In the audience, Cooper sat with tears in his eyes, watching his daughter receive her diploma. A year ago, Sarah began her speech. A moment of discrimination could have ended in anger and division. Instead, it became a spark that lit thousands of fires of change across our nation. The numbers told an incredible story. The Mitchell Inclusion Project had trained over 50,000 people. Discrimination complaints at participating companies had dropped by 75%. The project's scholarship fund had grown to $50 million, helping hundreds of minority students pursue their dreams. Maria Rodriguez, who had started as an aviation mechanic, was now running her own aircraft maintenance company. She employed 25 women, most of them graduates from the Academy's technical program. "Look how far we've come," Maria said during her guest speech. "Last week, I walked into a private terminal, and the security guard, an older white man, smiled and said, 'Welcome, Ms. Rodriguez. Your plane is ready for inspection.' That's what real change looks like." Mr. Thompson, the original terminal manager, had been promoted to head of diversity for the entire airport authority. His terminal's success story had become a case study at business schools around the world. Cooper, now a nationally recognized speaker on transformation and bias awareness, had just finished writing a book titled Changed Hearts: My Journey from Bias to Bridge Builder. The foreword was written by Sarah herself. "My grandfather was a security guard too," Cooper told the graduates. "He worked at a time when he had to step aside when white people walked past. Today, I teach other security guards how to treat everyone with equal respect. That's not just progress, that's a revolution of the heart." Sarah's phone buzzed during the ceremony. It was a message from the president's office. Congress had just approved funding to implement the Mitchell Inclusion Project's training program in all federal buildings and transportation hubs across America. After the ceremony, a small girl tugged at Sarah's sleeve. It was Maya, Cooper's granddaughter, now 13. "Ms. Mitchell," she said excitedly, "I got accepted into the Young Leaders program at my school. I'm going to teach other kids about what you and my grandpa did." Sarah looked around the room at all the faces. Graduates ready to change the world, families bursting with pride, business leaders eager to hire these new talents, and Cooper, who had become one of her closest friends and strongest allies. The original viral video played on a screen behind the stage, but now it was followed by hundreds of other clips. Security guards welcoming diverse passengers, minority executives boarding private jets without incident, young students learning to fly planes, and mechanics of all backgrounds working on aircraft. Sometimes, Sarah told the audience, the worst moment in your life becomes the best thing that could have happened, not just for you, but for thousands of others. Mitchell Technologies had grown into something far bigger than a tech company. It had become a symbol of change, a beacon of hope, and a model for how businesses could lead social transformation. As the ceremony ended, Sarah received one final surprise. The aviation industry's leading association had created a new annual award, the Sarah Mitchell Courage and Leadership Award, to be given to people who turn moments of discrimination into opportunities for positive change. Cooper walked up to Sarah after the ceremony, his family beside him. "You know what's amazing?" he said. "A year ago, I was the guy who wouldn't let you board your own plane. Today, my daughter is graduating from your academy, my granddaughter wants to be just like you, and I'm helping others avoid the mistakes I made. Life has a funny way of coming full circle." Sarah smiled, remembering her grandmother's words about victories that help others win too. Looking at the graduating class of the Mitchell Leadership Academy, she knew that this victory would keep helping others win for generations to come. Sarah Mitchell's day started like any other morning. She woke up at 5 a.m. in her modern penthouse apartment, did her usual yoga routine, and prepared for her business trip to New York. As the CEO of Mitchell Technologies, a company worth over $500 million, she was used to early mornings and busy schedules. She chose to wear something comfortable for the flight, a pair of designer sweatpants, a soft cashmere sweater, and limited edition sneakers that cost more than most people's monthly salary. But Sarah wasn't flashy about her wealth. She believed in being comfortable and practical, especially during long flights. The morning traffic was light as she drove her Tesla Model X through the city streets. The car's quiet engine matched her peaceful mood as she thought about the important meetings ahead. Her company was about to launch a new software that could change how small businesses operated, and she was excited to present it to potential investors. At 6:30 a.m., Sarah pulled up to the private aviation terminal. The rising sun cast long shadows across the tarmac where several private jets stood waiting for their passengers. She could see her own jet in the distance, a sleek Gulfstream G650 with her company's logo on the tail. As she gathered her laptop bag and small suitcase from the car, Sarah noticed something different. The usual security guard, Mike, who always greeted her with a warm smile, wasn't at his post. Instead, there was a new face, a man who looked to be in his 50s, with gray hair and a stern expression. His name tag read James Cooper. Sarah walked toward the terminal entrance with confidence, her heels clicking against the polished floor. But before she could reach the door, Cooper stepped in front of her, blocking her path. His face showed clear disapproval as he looked her up and down. "Excuse me, miss," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "This is a private terminal. The regular passenger entrance is in the main building." He pointed toward the commercial terminal in the distance. Sarah took a deep breath, maintaining her composure. She'd faced prejudice before, but it never got easier. "I understand this is a private terminal," she said calmly, reaching into her bag for her credentials. "I'm here for my scheduled flight." Cooper let out a short laugh, not even bothering to look at the documents she was trying to show him. "Listen," he said, crossing his arms, "unless you're part of the cleaning staff, there's no way you have a flight booked here. This terminal is for private jet owners and their guests only." Other passengers began arriving, some stopping to watch the scene unfold. A few pulled out their phones, recording the interaction. Sarah noticed some of them whispering to each other, but she kept her focus on the guard. "Sir," she tried again, her voice firm but polite, "if you would just look at my documentation." "I don't need to look at anything," Cooper interrupted. "I've been doing this job long enough to know who belongs here and who doesn't." His emphasis on the word belongs made his meaning crystal clear. Just then, Sarah's phone buzzed. It was a message from her executive team. They were running a few minutes late for their company retreat. She smiled slightly, knowing what was about to happen. Instead of arguing further, she pulled out her phone and dialed a number she knew by heart. "Hello, this is Sarah Mitchell," she said into the phone, maintaining eye contact with Cooper. "I seem to be having some trouble accessing the terminal for my flight this morning." "Yes, that's right, the Mitchell Technologies jet." Cooper's expression began to change as he heard her words. A few feet away, one of the other passengers gasped in recognition. "That's Sarah Mitchell?" They whispered loudly. "The Sarah Mitchell." The color started draining from Cooper's face as he realized his mistake. In his rush to judge based on appearance, he had just prevented one of the most successful tech CEOs in the country, and a regular client of the private terminal, from boarding her own jet. Sarah ended her call and looked at Cooper with dignity, her head held high. She knew what would happen next, but she wasn't interested in revenge or public humiliation. Instead, she saw an opportunity to turn this moment into something meaningful, a chance to challenge prejudices and create positive change. Within minutes of Sarah's phone call, the terminal manager, Mr. Thompson, came running out of his office. He was a tall man in his 40s, wearing an expensive suit and a very worried expression on his face. Sweat appeared on his forehead as he rushed toward the entrance. "Ms. Mitchell, I am so sorry about this misunderstanding," Mr. Thompson called out as he approached. He shot an angry look at Cooper, who was still standing there with his mouth slightly open. "Please, let me escort you to your jet personally." But before Sarah could respond, 4 more people walked through the terminal doors. They were her executive team, all dressed sharply in business attire and carrying their own bags. Mark Chen, her chief technology officer, immediately sensed the tension in the air. "Sarah, is everything okay?" Mark asked, looking between his boss and the security guard. The other executives also stopped, forming a protective circle around their CEO. Cooper's face turned even paler when he saw the group. He started to stutter. I didn't know. I mean..." Sarah raised her hand calmly, silencing everyone. The terminal had become very quiet, with other passengers and staff watching the scene unfold. Some were still recording with their phones, while others whispered to each other about what was happening. "Mr. Cooper," Sarah said, her voice clear and strong, "I want you to understand something. Today, you didn't just make a mistake, you showed everyone here what prejudice looks like in real life." She took a step closer to him, her designer sneakers squeaking slightly on the polished floor. "You saw a black woman in casual clothes and immediately decided she didn't belong here. You didn't even bother to check my ID or flight documents. Instead, you assumed I was cleaning staff." Cooper looked down at his shoes, unable to meet her eyes. Mr. Thompson started to say something, but Sarah continued speaking. "I own a $500 million technology company. That jet out there?" She pointed through the terminal windows at her Gulfstream. "That's mine. Not rented, not borrowed. Mine. But you know what's interesting? Even if I were here to clean the terminal, I would still deserve to be treated with respect." Other passengers began nodding in agreement. One woman in a business suit actually started clapping, but quickly stopped when she realized no one else had joined in. Mr. Thompson stepped forward again, his face red with embarrassment. "Miss Mitchell, I assure you that this kind of behavior is not what we stand for. Mr. Cooper is a temporary worker, and I promise you he will never work at this terminal again." Cooper finally found his voice, though it came out shaky and weak. "Miss Mitchell, I apologize. I was wrong too." Sarah held up her hand again. "Save your apology, Mr. Cooper. Instead, I want you to do something more important. I want you to remember this moment. Remember how sure you were about judging someone based on their appearance, and how completely wrong you turned out to be." Her executive team stood proudly behind her, and Mark couldn't help but smile. This was exactly why they all respected Sarah so much. She could turn even the worst situations into teaching moments. Sarah turned to Mr. Thompson. "I don't want Mr. Cooper fired." This surprised everyone, including Cooper himself. "Instead, I have a better idea. My company runs diversity and inclusion training programs. I think the entire security staff here could benefit from attending one, at my company's expense." Mr. Thompson nodded eagerly. "Of course, Ms. Mitchell, that's very generous of you." Sarah checked her watch. They were now running 15 minutes behind schedule. She looked at her team and smiled. "Well, shall we? New York is waiting." As they walked through the terminal toward their jet, Sarah could hear people talking behind her. Some were discussing what they'd just witnessed, while others were quickly Googling her name and company. A few were already posting the video of the incident on social media. Sarah knew this story wouldn't end here. By the time they landed in New York, it would probably be all over the internet. But maybe, just maybe, it would help change someone else's perspective too. By the time Sarah's private jet reached cruising altitude, the video of her encounter with Cooper had already gone viral. People in the terminal had shared multiple angles of the incident, and social media was buzzing with activity. Sarah sat in her comfortable leather seat, watching her phone light up with notifications. "Sarah, you might want to see this," Mark said, passing his tablet to her. On the screen was a trending Twitter hashtag. #RespectLikeAMitchell. People were sharing their own stories of discrimination at high-end establishments, and many were praising Sarah's calm and educational response to the situation. Jennifer Wong, Sarah's head of public relations, was sitting across from them, already fielding calls from major news networks. "CNN wants an interview. So does Good Morning America," she said, looking up from her phone. "This story is getting bigger by the minute." Sarah took a sip of her morning coffee, thinking carefully about what to do next. She hadn't planned on becoming the face of another discrimination story, but now that it was happening, she wanted to use it wisely. "Look at these comments," Lisa, her chief marketing officer, said. She started reading from her phone. "Sarah Mitchell showed us how to handle racism with class. This is what real leadership looks like. I'm looking up Mitchell Technologies right now. We need more CEOs like her." The jet's Wi-Fi system was getting flooded with messages from their company employees too. Many of the minority staff members were sending emotional emails, thanking Sarah for standing up and showing leadership in such a situation. "Our company website traffic has increased by 300% in the last hour," Mark reported, checking the analytics on his laptop. "And our job application page is getting more hits than ever before." Sarah pulled out her own laptop, opened a new document, and began typing. Her fingers moved quickly across the keyboard as she drafted a message. The whole team watched quietly, knowing their CEO well enough to recognize when she was forming a plan. "Jennifer," Sarah said, finally looking up from her screen, "cancel the TV interviews. I have a better idea." She turned her laptop around so everyone could see what she'd written. It was a plan for a new initiative, the Mitchell Inclusion Project. Instead of just talking about what happened, Sarah had explained, "We're going to do something about it. I want to set up a program that helps companies recognize and eliminate discriminatory practices. We'll start with that private terminal, but we won't stop there." The team leaned in closer as Sarah outlined her vision. The project would offer free diversity training to companies, create scholarships for minority students in technology and aviation, and establish a mentorship program for entrepreneurs from underrepresented backgrounds. "But here's the most important part," Sarah continued. "We're going to invite Mr. Cooper to be part of the launch event. If he's willing to share his story of how this incident changed his perspective, it could help others understand their own biases better." Meanwhile, back at the private terminal, things were also changing rapidly. Mr. Thompson had called an emergency staff meeting. The security company that employed Cooper had sent their senior management team to address the situation. News vans were starting to gather outside the terminal. Cooper sat in the break room, watching the viral video of himself on a coworker's phone. His children had already called him, having recognized their father in the footage. His teenage daughter's disappointed voice still rang in his ears. "Dad, how could you do that?" The terminal's regular customers were calling in, sharing their own experiences with discrimination and demanding changes. Several had threatened to take their business elsewhere unless the terminal implemented better training for its staff. Mr. Thompson's phone buzzed with a message from Sarah's team. As he read it, his worried expression changed to one of surprise and then relief. The message detailed Sarah's plan for the inclusion project and the terminal's role in it. Instead of pursuing legal action or damaging the terminal's reputation, she was offering them a chance to be part of the solution. As their jet continued toward New York, Sarah looked out the window at the clouds below. What had started as an unpleasant confrontation was transforming into something much bigger, a movement for change that would impact far more people than just one security guard at one private terminal. When Sarah's private jet landed in New York 3 hours later, the story had exploded beyond anything she could have imagined. Her phone had so many notifications that it kept freezing. News helicopters were hovering near the private terminal, hoping to catch her arrival. "You might want to see these numbers," Jennifer said, showing Sarah her tablet as they taxied to their parking spot. The video had been viewed over 5 million times. #RespectLikeaMitchell was now the #1 trending topic worldwide. Even celebrities and politicians were sharing the story and commenting on it. But 1 week after the incident, Sarah stood on a stage at the Mitchell Technologies headquarters. The room was packed with over 300 people, business leaders, aviation industry executives, media representatives, and most importantly, James Cooper and his family. Cooper sat in the front row, looking nervous in his new suit. His teenage daughter held his hand tightly, while his wife kept wiping tears from her eyes. They had all flown to New York on Sarah's private jet, the same one he had tried to prevent her from boarding a week ago. "Change doesn't come from punishment," Sarah began her speech, her voice calm and clear. "Real change comes from understanding, education, and giving people a chance to do better." She looked directly at Cooper and smiled warmly. The Mitchell Inclusion Project was launching today, but it had already accomplished more than Sarah had imagined. 50 major companies had signed up for the training program. 10 private aviation companies had pledged to revise their security protocols. The scholarship fund had grown to over $2 million. "Mr. Cooper, would you please join me on stage?" Sarah asked. The audience went quiet as Cooper slowly stood up and walked to the podium. His hands were shaking slightly, but his voice was strong. "A week ago, I was the face of discrimination in America," Cooper said, looking out at the crowd. "Today, I want to be the face of change. My grandfather couldn't even enter buildings through the front door because of his skin color. And here I was, doing the same thing to others. It stops with me." People in the audience started crying. A video played on the big screen behind them, showing interviews with people who had faced similar discrimination. Among them was Maria Rodriguez, the young aviation mechanic from the New York airport, who was now heading the project's aviation division. Sarah announced the first major initiative: free training programs for security staff at all transportation hubs. The second was a mentorship program pairing experienced executives with minority business students. The third was a technology platform that would help companies track and improve their diversity metrics. But our biggest announcement today, Sarah said, is the Mitchell Leadership Academy. She unveiled plans for a new school that would train minority students in business, technology, and aviation. And our first instructor for the security training program will be Mr. James Cooper. Cooper looked shocked. His daughter started clapping first, then the whole room joined in. He hadn't known about this part of the plan. Nobody knows the importance of this training better than someone who has lived through both sides of this issue, Sarah explained. Mr. Cooper's experience and his commitment to change make him the perfect person to lead these sessions. After the presentation, during the reception, Cooper's daughter approached Sarah. "Thank you," she said, wiping away tears. "My dad hasn't slept well since that day, but now he's excited about making a difference. You didn't just change his life, you changed our whole family's future." The media coverage was overwhelming. Major networks broadcast the launch event live. Social media exploded with support. Hashtag Mitchell Project started trending alongside hashtag RespectLikeMitchell. Back in her office later that evening, Sarah received an unexpected email. It was from the owner of the private terminal where everything had started. He wanted to make his facility the first official training center for the Mitchell Leadership Academy's aviation program. Mark came in with more good news. 10 more companies just signed up for the program, and guess what? Remember that nervous intern who recorded the original video? She just got offered a job as a social media manager at a major airline. They said they loved how she handled the situation. Sarah looked at the framed photo on her wall. Her grandmother in her maid's uniform, standing proudly in front of the house where she worked. "Look how far we've come, Grandma," she whispered. "And look how far we'll go." As she prepared to leave for the day, Sarah got one last message. It was a photo from Cooper. He was practicing his first presentation for the training program. His message read, "Thank you for showing me that it's never too late to learn, to change, and to make a difference." Sarah smiled, knowing that this was just the beginning. Sometimes the worst moments in life lead to the best opportunities for change. And change, when done right, could create ripples that affect generations to come. 3 months after the launch of the Mitchell Inclusion Project, Sarah sat in her office reviewing the latest progress reports. The numbers on her screen told an amazing story of growth and change that even she hadn't expected. The Mitchell Leadership Academy had received over 10,000 applications for its first class. Companies were fighting to sponsor students, offering guaranteed job interviews after graduation. What had started as a response to discrimination had grown into a nationwide movement. "Sarah, you need to see this," Jennifer said, rushing into the office with her tablet. She pulled up a video that was going viral. It showed James Cooper giving a training session to security staff at a major airport. The comments section was filled with praise for his honest, powerful message about recognizing and overcoming prejudice. "Remember when he could barely look me in the eye?" Sarah said, smiling as she watched Cooper confidently address the room. "Now look at him. He's trained over 1,000 security personnel in 3 months." Mark knocked on her door next, carrying even better news. "The government wants to adopt our training program for all federal buildings," he announced. "They're sending representatives next week to discuss implementing it nationwide." Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from Maria Rodriguez, the former aviation mechanic. She had just finished leading her first all-female aircraft maintenance training class. The photo showed 20 young women in mechanics' uniforms, beaming with pride as they held their certificates. "Miss Mitchell," Maria had written. 5 of these women were told they didn't belong in aviation. Now they're certified mechanics. This is what change looks like. The original private terminal had been completely transformed. Mr. Thompson had hired a diverse security team, and their customer satisfaction ratings were higher than ever. Other terminals were following their example, competing to see who could create the most welcoming environment for all passengers. Sarah's calendar was packed with speaking engagements, but one appointment stood out. She was scheduled to give the graduation speech at her old high school, the same school where a teacher had once told her she wasn't cut out for business. As she worked on her speech, her assistant brought in an interesting letter. It was from Cooper's granddaughter, a 12-year-old girl named Maya. She had written about how her grandfather's story had changed her life. "Dear Ms. Mitchell," the letter read, "because of you, my grandpa learned to be better. Now he teaches others to be better too. When I grow up, I want to be just like you, someone who changes the world by changing hearts." Later that afternoon, Sarah visited the Mitchell Leadership Academy. The halls were busy with students learning everything from business management to aircraft engineering. In one classroom, a young black woman was practicing a presentation about starting her own tech company. "Our first class will graduate next month," the academy's director reported. "Every single student already has multiple job offers. Companies are literally competing to hire them." Sarah stopped by Cooper's training room. He was showing security staff how to check credentials respectfully and efficiently. On his desk stood a framed photo of him with Sarah from the launch event, next to a sign that read, "Be the change you wish to see." "The best part," Cooper told his class, "is that I'm not just teaching security procedures. I'm teaching people to see each other as human beings first. That's what Ms. Mitchell taught me." Back in her office, Sarah received an unexpected video call. It was from a small private airport in Texas. Their security guard, an older white man, had recognized a black female pilot and personally escorted her to her plane, thanking her for her service. The pilot had cried, saying it was the first time she'd been treated with such respect at that airport. "Your training program made this possible," the airport manager said. "We're seeing changes like this every day." As evening approached, Sarah stood at her office window, watching planes take off and land at the distant airport. She thought about how one difficult moment had sparked a movement that was changing thousands of lives. Her phone buzzed again, another message from Cooper. "Just finished training 50 more security officers. One of them said he used to be just like me. Now he's going to be different. We're changing the world, one person at a time." Sarah smiled, remembering her grandmother's words. Sometimes the best victories are the ones that help others win too. The Mitchell Inclusion Project was proving just that. 6 months after the incident that changed everything, Sarah found herself sitting in the White House. The president had invited her to discuss making the Mitchell Inclusion Project a national standard for workplace training. "Your program has achieved in 6 months what we've been trying to do for years," the president's chief advisor said, showing Sarah the latest statistics. Workplace discrimination complaints had dropped by 40% in companies that had implemented her training program. After the White House meeting, Sarah's phone lit up with a video message from Cooper. He was at a high school career fair, speaking to a group of students. The teenagers sat completely silent, captivated by his story of transformation. "I used to be the problem," Cooper told them, his voice full of emotion. "Now, thanks to Ms. Mitchell's forgiveness and guidance, I get to be part of the solution. Each of you has the power to change, to learn, and to make a difference." Back at Mitchell Technologies, Sarah's team had more exciting updates. The Mitchell Leadership Academy was opening 5 new locations across the country. Companies were offering to fund entire buildings, eager to be associated with the program's success. Maria Rodriguez, now a senior director at the academy, brought in a special visitor, a 65-year-old black woman who had been denied entry to a private airport 30 years ago. She had finally gotten her pilot's license and now owned her own small aircraft. "I never thought I'd see this day," the woman said, tears in her eyes as she watched diverse groups of students practicing in flight simulators. "You've created a world where my grandchildren won't have to fight just to be respected." The original viral video had now been viewed over 100 million times. Schools used it in their social studies classes to discuss discrimination and positive responses to prejudice. Business schools made it a case study in crisis management and leadership. Sarah received a surprising call from a major airlines CEO. They wanted to create a special scholarship named after her grandmother, the woman who had worked as a maid but dreamed of seeing her children fly high. The scholarship would help minority women become pilots. Cooper's impact had grown beyond anyone's expectations. He had become a sought-after speaker, sharing his story at companies around the world. His honest admission of bias and his journey to change had inspired others to confront their own prejudices. Yesterday, Cooper texted Sarah, "A security guard came up to me crying. He said my story made him realize how he'd been treating people. He apologized to his whole team and asked to take our training program. The private terminal where everything started had become a model of inclusive practices. They now had the most diverse staff of any private aviation facility in the country. Their customer satisfaction ratings were at an all-time high. Mr. Thompson, the terminal manager, sent Sarah a special report. Our terminal now serves 40% more minority executives than before. He wrote, "They say they choose us because they know they'll be treated with respect here." Sarah's own company had grown in unexpected ways. Job applications had tripled, with many candidates saying they were inspired by her leadership during the incident. Mitchell Technologies was now ranked as the most diverse tech company in America. Late one evening, as Sarah was leaving her office, she saw a group of young black girls touring the Mitchell Leadership Academy. They were from a local middle school, wide-eyed as they watched female pilots and mechanics at work. "Are you really Sarah Mitchell?" one little girl asked, recognizing her. "My mom says you're the reason she wasn't afraid to start her own business." Sarah spent an hour showing the girls around, telling them stories about her grandmother, about Cooper, about Maria, and about all the people who had turned one moment of discrimination into a lifetime of positive change. That night, Sarah received one more message. It was from Cooper's granddaughter Maya. "Thank you for not giving up on my grandpa. He's teaching me that it's never too late to learn and change. When I grow up, I want to help people change too." Sarah smiled, thinking about how far they'd come. What had started as a confrontation at an airport had grown into a movement that was changing lives across the country. And this was still just the beginning.